And I'm going to share my screen. We'll just go ahead and jump in since this is a very brief workshop. Please let me know if you cannot see my screen.
I can see it.
We good? Okay, great. And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so thanks, Barbara and Tamika, for joining me today. This is a brief 30-minute workshop continuation of our online teaching and course design best practice workshop series. So it should only be about 30 minutes long. I will be recording and sharing the recording and slides if you want to go back to it at a later point. And as always, feel free to interrupt. These are designed to be more informal conversations as opposed to presentations, but I do have some content to share today. So today we're going to be focusing on best practices 32 and 33 on assessment alignment, variety, and sequencing. So we're just getting into, I'll just go ahead and I'll come back to this, but we're just getting into the assessment best practice, and these are the first two in that assessment category. So just as a reminder, there are 7 best practices. Assessment is the 4th of these. So just as a reminder, sorry, this is a little blurry, but I brought in the annotated best practices, and you can see they're somewhat numbered differently. It's the same best practice or best practices as in the unannotated version. But we'll be dealing with these first two, and just to grab the description and rationale, the guides. There's lots of resources we've developed for you all to help you all adhere to these best practice recommendations. But we're going to get into both, not in incredible detail today, because there's a lot you could say about them, but into some detail, and also just sort of discuss your needs as instructors in your efforts to implement these best practices. So before we jump in, I wanted to see if there are any questions or concerns, anything you'd like to focus on today so that I'm not just talking at you, but you're getting what you came here for. Any questions, anything you'd like to chat about from the get-go?
No, I'm here just to hear what you have to say.
Okay, thanks, Barbara.
Yep, and same thing for me too. I'll ask questions if I feel a need to.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll just go ahead and jump right into the first best practice recommendation, and that is 32. So this is one in a series of best practice recommendations that we've presented on alignment. If you recall, or if you attended or watched the previous workshop recordings, we focused on alignment between learning objectives and course objectives, and alignment between learning materials and objectives. This best practice focuses on the alignment between the courses and modules learning objectives and the assessments. So this is the literal reading of the best practice. All assessments measure the course's learning objectives or outcomes. And the annotation, I won't read it word for word, but essentially what it states is that assessments need to be aligned with the learning objectives because it allows instructors to evaluate the degree to which students have achieved those objectives, both module and course learning goals. So alignment, in addition to a number of things, ensures that students are being evaluated on the knowledge and skills that are most important for achieving success in the course and beyond the course. So as you probably know, but just as a refresher, assessments are not just exams, right? They can include any way that you have any task or assignment you've implemented to evaluate your students' understanding of an objective or a learning goal. So this could be exams, quizzes, essays, projects, presentations, group work, OSCEs or simulations, performance tasks. And just as a reminder, so assessments are evaluating the degree to which students have achieved those objectives. And this is really distinct from other activities such as reading and taking notes or engaging in class discussions when they're practicing their understanding. Now, you can practice your understanding through ungraded formative assessments, right? And those are excellent means of practicing before you are evaluated. But here we're focusing mainly on these formal evaluation methods. So just as a reminder about alignment and the importance of alignment, I've brought in Mr. Skeleton here, which I've used every time for my alignment workshops, just to remind you again of the various components that make up a well-aligned course, just like a well-aligned body. I think of it in terms of the spine, right? Because my head is in the health sciences too. So course level objectives, module objectives, and assessments, as you can see here, are what we're talking about today. And they're just, assessments are one component of alignment. We can also talk about learning materials and course activities, again, distinct from assessments or formal evaluation methods. So just keep in mind the value of alignment, and without alignment, as I like to say, your course is like, it would be like lacking a skeleton without it, which it cannot, it cannot stand, it cannot support itself. So everything really comes back to alignment in many ways when you're engaging in good, in course best practice course design approaches. So there are many, many benefits of alignment. And these are not the only 9, but just to remind you of why alignment matters. Alignment ensures that assessments accurately measure what they're intended to measure. So you get improved validity. You get ideally enhanced student focus. So if assignments clearly or assessments clearly relate to objectives, students can better understand what's expected of them and focus their efforts better. More efficient instruction, right? If you are targeting your instruction to your objectives, you are sort of getting rid of all the nice to have stuff, but focusing on what you really need to do in order to meet your learning objectives. Fair evaluation, it helps to eliminate the risk of bias, evaluate students based on the same clearly defined criteria and being as objective as possible in doing so. Easier course evaluation if you have, again, set alignment in your course, and then easier to evaluate and make updates based upon student performance toward those objectives if your activities and assessments are well aligned. I think it has increased student motivation, right? Students can see the relevance of their work when they're clearly connected to the stated objectives, right? They understand why they're doing something and what the purpose of it is and how it will benefit them. And that's, in my opinion, and I think the studies show that that's connected to increased motivation. Preparation for future learning, communication, and of course, one we don't want to forget, the importance of supporting accreditation, because accreditors, of course, are looking for clearly stated objectives and that all that you are providing to students are aligned with those objectives. I thought we'd just do a fun little interaction to begin with. Determining whether or not an assessment, a brief wording of an assessment is aligned with the stated objectives. So what do you all think? Objective, identify the major risk factors for cardiovascular disease. You have 2 potential assignment or assessment tasks. One on the left states to write an essay explaining the pathophysiology of atherosclerosis and its role in cardiovascular disease progression. And the other is answer a multiple answer quiz question selecting from multiple risk factors. Which of these, or both, or neither, is aligned with the stated objective? Opinion.
I think the
think
one
both
about the
are,
queen.
What's that?
Okay. Go, Barbara.
okay, so I think both are aligned, but I would be somewhat hesitant to use the essay
Mhm.
because I
Yeah.
think it can be kind of overwhelming for people and they can go in all kinds of directions. If it were maybe a case study that asked to identify the major, reasons
Risk.
why this person is at risk for atherosclerosis, I'd feel more comfortable rather than him
Mhm.
having to create this essay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 That's a
But
I
good.
that's
think the
just my
second
feel.
one.
It's just me. I don't know what you feel, Tamika.
Yeah, I was saying, I think the second one, I agree, the second one fits better for this specific one because they're identifying the major risk factors. So I would go with the second one more so than the essay.
Yeah, and that's what I've that's those the answers I've given here. I think, Barbara, you could certainly update those instructions so that they satisfied that objective. Like if you were to say, as you said, identify the major risk
Mhm.
factors in an essay that explains the pathophysiology.
Yeah, that
Mhm.
would make more
Mhm.
sense to me, right? Not just like
Mhm.
write an essay, because they could just grab something from any pathophysiology textbook
Yeah.
and there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the key is really we know that identify is in looking at those verbs, right? So identify
Mhm.
is one of those lower order Bloom's verbs, right? So
Yeah.
it's just basic understanding and comprehension. When we're
Mhm.
identifying something, we're just pointing to it, right? We're not needing to elaborate, evaluate, analyze, right? Things that are more higher order, more
Yeah.
advanced tasks, right? So
Mhm.
if you're asking them to write an essay explaining the pathophysiology, that would be a higher order task than merely identifying it.
Yeah.
So, but and that's if you and that's the importance of alignment. So if you really want them to be able to explain it, then perhaps you need to reconsider, or you definitely need to reconsider the verb you're using for that objective, right?
Mhm. I agree.
Because you're asking them to do more with the information you've given them than the objective states, right?
Yeah.
Let's try another one. Objective, evaluate the ethical implications of using AI-assisted diagnostic tools in clinical practice. One of these is to design a protocol for implementing an AI-assisted diagnostic tool, and the other is to analyze a case study where an AI algorithm misdiagnosed a patient and write an essay discussing the ethical considerations.
Okay, I just gotta say the first one freaks me out. I don't see even, I mean, evaluate is one thing, but design a protocol for implementing in a hospital setting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Way
not
up
meeting the
there.
objective. Mm-mm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think the second one.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's your indication that that is the incorrect answer, because if they're designing a protocol, right, they're not really evaluating it,
Right,
right? Yeah,
right.
exactly. So again, be mindful of that verb pairing, right? When they're evaluating, again, that's a higher order Bloom's task. It's more advanced. It's something they would do once they've acquired that foundational knowledge. Maybe it's something they would do later on after they've in a course, or later on in a module once they've got understanding of the foundational knowledge, and can then begin to analyze, a case study where they write an essay. That would be appropriate for evaluating, and one could do that if they have the skills to do so in an essay of that kind.
Yeah, I also like with the second one, when you're talking about evaluating the ethical implications, which is not just saying, tell me the ethical like concerns, but it's the implications on like on something, on the patient. And in that assignment, the second one, it's, you could talk about the implications on they have to deal with transparency, patient autonomy. So they give you some of those things that you can include. So it kind of
Yep.
goes along with it, that it's not just evaluating to analyze something, but to look beyond, like, okay, you heard about it, you read the case study, but what is the impact what
Yeah.
is the fallout from it? Which makes you
Yeah.
have to go a little deeper with implications.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's, important that this assignment task or assessment task includes a potential, a case, right?
Mhm.
Where something went wrong. And now the learner is asked to evaluate why that is and what were the ethical considerations of,
Mhm.
using that. So evaluating, you're assessing, you're better understanding, as you say, Tamika, the impact of a particular choice or implementation, right? As opposed to
Mhm.
designing something, right? Where you're not really looking at all at
Right.
what that impact was.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
it's not specific at all about what you would even be wanting to take into consideration. I mean,
Mhm.
potential ethical concerns, that's enormous.
Yeah, true. It is somewhat vague too, right? So just again, just to be mindful of alignment, when you're thinking of alignment, think about those verbs that, what you're expecting students to know should match the task, right? Um,
Mhm.
so this leads us to best practice 33, which is very much connected to 32, and relates specifically to assessment variety and sequencing. So I mean, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell, right? And the annotation talks about variety providing a more accurate and comprehensive picture and the importance of sequencing. We're going to get into that in a little more detail, so we don't need to read that word for word now. Just remember, again, the emphasis on variety and sequencing really being key to understanding this best practice recommendation. So what is assessment variety? I mean, you probably know what it is, but just as a brief sort of definition in a nutshell, assessment methods are diverse. It's when assessment methods are diverse and give students opportunities to express their knowledge of a subject in different ways using multiple means of expression. So written, maybe multimedia, video, audio, maybe through an actual demonstration, an oral presentation, or a variety of different methods of giving students the ability to express what they know to you, right? That really pertains to variety. And there are lots of benefits to varied assessments, as you know, right? More comprehensive evaluation, different assessment types can measure various aspects of student learning, and that provides a more complete picture of their knowledge. As we know, it accommodates diverse learning styles. So different types of assessments cater to different students' strengths and preferences, which allow for more opportunities to excel. Again, back to reducing bias. Using multiple assessment types can help to mitigate potential bias inherent in different types of assessment. Enhanced engagement, just like in alignment. Students can stay interested more when they're presented with more variety. Real world skill development, right? When you use authentic assessment, students have the opportunity to really apply what they're learning to potential real world scenario. And that's, again, key to varying it up. Retention, and I think that's really important here. Engaging with material in various ways through different assessment types can really help with long-term retention of knowledge. And science really backs that up, especially when it comes to the thinking around interleaving or integrating different sort of methods of learning, whether it be through different content that the student interacts with or different ways of interacting with that content. And having a periodic kind of a sequential or dipping in and out of those things in an effort to improve retention and interest, right? Or improve retention because of improved interest, right? Increase formative opportunities and test anxiety, right? If you've got a lot of tests and you're focusing mainly on examinations, right, you may up the anxiety in your students, which may be necessary to a degree, but also, could lead to other issues. So just an example, this is just one of many approaches, right? This is not to say that one is the right way to go and the other isn't. But when we talk about assessment variety, again, we're talking about different types of assessments, and it is related to sequencing, which is something we'll talk about in a moment. So I think this is fairly obvious, but when you look on the left or the right, which one strikes you as being varied? Which one strikes you as lacking in variation? So I think you could say that even if some of these, are maybe necessary and you'd want to include them at least in that sequential order, on the right, we have a not just a priority on high stakes, well, examinations, right? Quizzing, testing, but also on sort of written means of expression, right? As opposed to on the left, different types of ways students can express their knowledge of a topic. This is very much connected to assessment sequencing. In fact, they're so interrelated, it's hard to separate them, which is why this best practice connects the two. And sequencing refers to the organization of your assessments that are taught according to a logical and meaningful progression. So the idea of building upon previously learned content and in accordance with the learner's progression toward mastery. So as I mentioned, this is very much interrelated to assessment variety. And again, here's just one of, infinite number of examples where you could show the value of sequencing. And it goes back not only to alignment, which we've talked about already, but also to, varied kind of assessment types. So on the left, we have sort of foundational or formative assessment tasks, right? Maybe you begin with a self-assessment where a student, a low stakes or maybe even no stakes, non-graded assessment where a student sort of evaluates their own understanding. Then maybe they share that understanding of a topic or another topic in a post, and then they're quizzed on it, right? So as you can see, the tasks begin more foundational and they move to higher stakes, more advanced application, where we see exams, projects, where we're seeing higher order application. So that's where you get into those evaluate, analyze, create, design, Bloom's verbs, right? Which are require considerably more effort than just identifying or listing, right? Things that would be likely to be found in a quiz, for example. This is also connected to scaffolding. And so I've highlighted those assignments or the assignment that is scaffolded in the sequencing example. And scaffolding, as you probably know, essentially means breaking down a big task into smaller, more digestible steps. So in this case, we have a final project that's broken down into parts, and these are not all the steps. These are just a few in that sequence. But part one, maybe they are developing an annotated bibliography, and that's done earlier on in the course, right? Part two, and this could be in any particular order that suits your objectives. They're developing a draft. Then potentially they give it to a peer to review for feedback before they submit the draft to you. So again, breaking that up into smaller steps helps the learner, and it also helps you, in my opinion, evaluate the students and also evaluate for potential academic integrity violations, especially in the age of AI, because then you get a better sense of how your student is performing over the course of a project's development, and they're just not rattling out a paper at 12 a.m. the night before it's due, and it's very difficult to discern what their writing style is like, among other things, before they submit it. So it's a good practice for lots of different reasons, but I think especially in the age of AI, when when the risk and the potential for offloading writing, written or writing focused assessments is higher, or offloading it to AI. And one thing I really want to point out that's key here is that all of these things are support UDL's guidelines for action and expression. I wanted to specifically refer to and just to remind you that UDL refers to the Universal Design for Learning, which is a framework for teaching and learning that's based on scientific insights into how humans learn. So it's very much rooted in, learning science. Guideline number 5 refers to expression and communication, which again refers to a lot of what we've talked about already, like using multiple media for communication or expressing learning in flexible ways, which refers to assessment variety. Using tools that complement the learning goal, right? So if you're going to ask them to identify something, right, you're not asking them to write an essay about it, right? You're asking them to point to it, right? So the action should be aligned with the learning goal. Addressing biases with wide variety of forms of communication. So UDL guidelines not only support accessibility, but they support learners of all types. So it's a really great, and I can share the link with you if you don't have direct access to that. A great way of sort of checking to make sure you're adhering to best practice recommendations when it comes to aligning your assessments and your activities. Key takeaways. We're at 12:31. Always remember alignment, right? Connecting the action with the task, keeping it varied and balanced, mixing it up, following a logical progression, usually moving from lower order to higher order tasks. But again, it entirely depends on your objectives and what you're trying to what objectives you want your students to meet. Breaking up large tasks into smaller steps or scaffolding it. And then, maybe as you look toward the future and you're evaluating your assessments for alignment or your courses for alignment altogether, think about creating a diverse assessment plan using these UDL recommendations where you look back at your assessments and your existing objectives and determine again if the action or the task is meeting the objective and how you could maybe vary that in a way. If it's not, add a variation to your existing assessments that helps to ensure student success. So it's 12:32. That is it in brief. There's so much more we could talk about, and we don't have time to go into our discussion question, I guess. But do you guys have any questions, or if you come up against any obstacles or things you want to briefly talk through before we depart?